Started now. Perfect. Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Gladys Ayson, and the title of my presentation today is Thinking About Tomorrow and Beyond, Researching Future Thinking in Young Children. And I'm going to talk about the research focus of my lab that I do with my supervisor, Dr. Christina Atance, who is here somewhere in the audience today. And what I really hope that you all get from this presentation is an understanding of how children think about the future and why we study this. And also, I hope you all grab a familiarity in children's research in general and get familiar with that process and how that works and where we get the conclusions that we get. So first, I'm going to talk about why we study future thinking. So when I started my career as a future thinking researcher, I was really sure that I was going to generate a lot of interest from my family and friends about the research that I was doing. But over the years, I realized that I simply wasn't. The responses I was getting from my peers was really sort of deadpan, uninterested, pretty much bored of what I do. So I'm just going to say it right up front. First off, future thinking is really, really interesting. And it's really important as well, because it's involved in many important things that we do day to day, such as planning, saving, setting goals, exerting self-control, and so much more. And when a child begins to start thinking about the future, this is known as a significant cognitive milestone, and it seems to develop between the age of 3 and 5 years old. And the reason this is such an important milestone is because this represents the shift in thinking away from the here and now into unknown possibilities. And that's what we call a shift from concrete thinking into abstract thinking. So when you think about the benefits of future thinking, many things can come to mind. You can first think about how future thinking has helped you in your day-to-day life. And I've listed some examples here, like preparing for potential bad weather. If it's looking cloudy outside, maybe you'll bring an umbrella in case it rains later. Resisting an early dessert so you can avoid spoiling your dinner later. Creating a shopping list so you can remember what to buy when you're actually at the store. And then, of course, saving for retirement, for example. We know that Canadians do seem to struggle with saving for retirement. And hopefully this is where the research in my lab can really come to play, where we can learn how to develop saving strategies in young children earlier in life. We can also talk about the benefits of future thinking as the research tells us. So science is telling us that future thinking leads to more adaptive decision making, higher educational attainment, so going further with your education, and weight loss and weight management. And we'll talk about more throughout the presentation, and I'll even talk about these ones in more detail as well. And then there's one more benefit that kind of lies somewhere in the middle, and that is that future thinking is evolutionarily advantageous. So we as humans use future thinking to promote our culture, our progress, and assert our dominance in the world. If you think about it, human beings are the only species who adapt the world to our needs rather than adapt ourselves to our environment. Now, you may be wondering, can animals think about the future? Well, for now, the widely accepted answer is no, they cannot. We say that animals are stuck in the present. But some animals appear to anticipate future events. Hibernators, for example, they will forage and store food for a winter to come. I used to have a dog that would always come running into the kitchen every time I opened a squeaky cupboard because that's where we stored his treats. But does this mean that that dog was thinking ahead into a future event of eating a treat every time I opened the cupboard? No, not necessarily. Really what he was doing was he was associating that squeaking sound with getting a treat because that's usually what had happened. But the difference between animals' anticipations and anticipations that we create is that animal anticipations are inflexible mechanisms. Hibernators will still forage for the winter, even in the case of sudden global warming, let's say. And I often use my squeaky cupboard just to bring my dog in from the backyard, even if I wasn't planning on giving him a treat. So, how do we measure future thinking in young children? Well, it would be great if we could just ask them, are you thinking about the future right now? What are you thinking about right now? But children, particularly young children, still have a developing language. And since their language is still developing, we rely instead on behavioral measures. In other words, their actions. And so, what we do is we create paradigms where the child will do an action or make a choice, and we will see if that choice was made to serve their future. So these are the types of future thinking that I'm going to talk about in today's presentation. It is definitely not an exhaustive list by any means. There are so many types of future thinking out there. I'm going to start off by talking about episodic future thinking. Now, episodic future thinking, or EFT for short, is defined as imagining ourselves in a future event. So that's things like thinking about yourself in the next Zoom conference talk at this conference, or thinking about that walk that you're going to take later with your partner and your dog, or thinking about watching that next episode of your show next week. So it is a personal event that could or would happen to you at a certain time in the future. And there are many ways to test for episodic future thinking, but the most popular way is called the item choice test. Another name for this test is the spoon test. So if I do say spoon test, this is what I mean. So the item choice test is divided into 3 phases. First, we show the child a problem. In this case, the child is encountering a locked box with candy inside. And in this problem, they need an item to solve it. So they realize that they actually need a key to open the box and to get the candy. Later, in a different setting, we present them with an array of items, and we tell the child, you are going to go back into that first setting and you can bring one of these items with you. If the child uses their episodic future thinking, they're going to think about themselves back in that first setting, and they're going to anticipate running into that box again. And so, in response, they would prepare themselves by bringing the key. So, this time, they'll be able to open the box and get candy inside. Now, generally, 4-year-olds are able to pass a standard item choice test without any sort of problems. But there are things that affect episodic future thinking and performance on the item choice test. One of those things is memory. We see lower performance on the item choice test when there's a longer delay between the problem and the item choice. And that's simply because as more time passes by, the child may not have as good of a memory of what was in that first room or first setting. They may not remember the box, not remember needing the key, etc. Another thing that will affect episodic future thinking is distractibility. So we see lower performance on the item choice test when we put in attractive distractor objects. So we ran a version of the item choice test in our lab where with the key, we also offered a marshmallow and a Smartie. And we found that 3-year-olds especially really struggled to pick the key over the marshmallow and the Smartie. They tended to err towards that immediate, attractive treat. And this was true even though the key opened a box to a ton of marshmallows and Smarties. So you can see that a really desirable item will kind of prevent or distract the child from thinking about the future. And then finally, there is this idea of prompting or cueing. So how many hints or how obvious is the solution to the child? And how obvious are we making that solution to the child? And that is when we see lower performance when the item is not directly presented. So I'm going to talk about this one in more detail with a study that we ran in our lab in 2019, and it's a version of the item choice test. So children were given a toy lemon and they were introduced to Terry the tiger. Now, Terry the tiger loves lemons. So the child would have the opportunity to feed their lemon to Terry. Afterwards, Terry would leave the screen and they would meet Heather the hippo. Now, Heather the hippo loves apples, but the child never received an apple to begin with, and now they don't even have a lemon to feed Heather the hippo. So unfortunately, Heather does not get to eat at this time. Sorry, Heather. Children were then divided into one of 3 conditions. Some children received an item choice where they were presented with an apple, a lemon, and an orange, and they were asked to select one of those things to bring back into the first room. Other children were put in a generate category condition. Now, here they weren't presented with any items. Instead, they were simply asked, what would be a good fruit to bring back with you? The last of the children were put in a generate object condition, where they were asked, what would be a good thing to bring back with you? So, of course, in this last condition, children don't even receive the hint that the answer is some sort of fruit. They need to generate that solution all on their own. So this is what we found. So 4-year-olds did really well on the item choice condition, and that is what we expected because we know 4-year-olds do generally do well on an item choice test. So they could receive a score out of 2. They received 1 score if they said or selected apple, and they received another point if they mentioned Heather the hippo in the other room. So we see near perfect performance by the 4-year-olds in the item choice condition. The 4-year-olds in the generate category condition already had a drop in performance here. And then if you look at the 4-year-olds in the generate object condition, they're performing at near floor capacity. So barely any of them were able to pass the item choice test when they weren't given any sort of clue as to what they were to bring. And so this really tells us that the clues or the prompting that we give children really seems to help in their performance and their EFT. And so now here, I would like to put a quick shameless plug saying that I am recruiting for my own version of the item choice test over the summer. We are recruiting for it now, looking for 4 to 7-year-olds to run a version of the item choice test that'll be done on Zoom. And here we are interested in what will children do if we don't ask them to bring anything at all? Will they spontaneously go and get their own item and bring it to that first setting? So if you're interested in this research and would like to participate or have your child participate, please email ccll@uottawa.ca. Now, I want to talk about episodic future thinking and decision making because episodic future thinking seems to really help in making decisions. So, EFT can increase the value of delayed outcomes and steer individuals towards choices with long term benefits. And I'll show you an example of how this is done. So, there was one study that really showed how episodic future thinking moderated weight loss. And this was a study done in the Netherlands. So, what they did here was they recruited 9 to 14-year-old children who were obese or overweight, and they divided them into 2 conditions. So, some children were in the episodic future thinking condition, and some children were in the control condition. Those in the episodic future thinking group were asked to name some positive events that could happen to them 1 month from now, 6 months from now, and 1 year from now. Those in the control condition were not to think about the future. So instead, they were asked to name positive events that had happened to them in the last 24 hours. So here are some examples of some statements that were made or could have been made by the children in this study. So those in the episodic future thinking group would say, in 6 months, I will be celebrating my birthday. And those in the control group would say, last night, I had a nice chat with my brother. So these statements were actually recorded. And then later, the children were offered a ton of candy. Actually, all the candy that you see here was offered to them in the study. So they were told that for the next 15 minutes, they could eat as much or as little of the candy as they'd like. But while they were to enjoy the candy, the recordings that they had recorded earlier of the events were going to be played for them. So those in the episodic future thinking group would hear things like, in 6 months, I will be celebrating my birthday. And those in the control group would hear, last night, I had a nice chat with my brother. And this is what they found. So they found that the future thinking group ate significantly less calories than the control group. Now, when I say significant here, I mean that after statistical analysis, we're pretty sure there's only a 5% chance that this difference here is a fluke, essentially. So we're pretty sure that the difference we're seeing is due to the manipulation that we did. So children are consuming less calories because they did this future thinking exercise. Granted, it isn't a huge difference. It's only a difference of about 100 calories, but it gets even more interesting. So when the children were further divided into a low dietary restraint group, and which means that they were children who were not motivated to lose weight, And a high dietary restraint group, which were children that were motivated to lose weight, we saw some interesting effects. So again, this dark purple here is the future thinking group, and this light purple would be the control group. So what we're seeing here is in the low dietary restraint, the control group is actually consuming a little bit less than the future thinking group. But if you look at the high dietary restraint group, so those that were motivated to lose weight, we see a significant drop in the calories consumed in the future thinking group. So it really seems that motivation amplifies the effects of episodic future thinking. Now, one thing I do want to note to parents and families is whenever you do look at a graph, mind the y-axis. Please notice that I started off my y-axis here with 350 calories, not 0. If I had started my y-axis with 0 calories, this gap right here would look a lot smaller. So as you read articles, remember to think critically, and when you look at graphs, always take a look at the y-axis, because sometimes authors do tend to like to amplify their findings and make them look a little bit more visually appealing than they are. But it is still nonetheless a really, really interesting finding. So I'm going to give you all some tips and tricks on how to improve episodic future thinking in the children in your own lives, based on the research that we've seen. One of them is that reminders will help. Improve your child's memory of the previous times when they needed something. For example, you could say, remember when you were at your friend Johnny's house and you needed this camera? If you remind them of past times where they were in need of something or they felt disappointment, they'll be more likely to prepare themselves for a similar future event. My other piece of advice is to get them motivated. Future thinking does seem to help with decision making already, but it seems to be even more effective when the child is motivated to make a change. So now I'm going to talk about another type of future thinking, self-control. Now, self-control is a really, really fun type of future thinking to study. So self-control can also be called delay of gratification. That's what we see in the literature. Now, technically, delay of gratification is only an aspect of self-control. However, it is a large aspect, and it is probably the most well-studied aspect in children. So, self control or delay of gratification is defined as resisting an immediate reward to obtain a higher value reward later. And we really saw this in that weight loss study as well. If they resisted that immediately gratifying candy that tasted so sweet now, they could obtain that higher value reward later, which is weight loss. So the most popular paradigm to measure delay of gratification or self-control in young children is the Marshmallow Test. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Marshmallow Test already because its popularity has surpassed the scientific community and moved into the realm of TikTok and YouTube, where parents are running their own version of the Marshmallow Test, although they may not even be aware that it is the Marshmallow Test. So how the original marshmallow test works is you present the child with one marshmallow and you tell them you can eat this now, or if you wait a little bit, I'm going to come back with another marshmallow. Then you'll have 2 marshmallows, but I'll only give you the other marshmallow if you don't eat this one before I come back. Now, the original marshmallow test lasts about 15 minutes. So children are waiting 15 minutes for this next marshmallow, which is a really, really long time. But believe it or not, 4-year-olds are able to wait that length of time. And we have replicated that in our own lab as well. But I think the marshmallow test is really best described visually. So I've pulled a video off YouTube. This was not in our lab, it was from a National Geographic segment, but it is the marshmallow test and it'll show you just how fun the marshmallow test is to run.
And I'll be back in a moment.
If we wait, you'll give us 2?
Yep, if you wait, you get 2. Or you can eat it now, whichever you want. Okay, I'll be back in a little bit.
I'm gonna wait. I wonder what we're gonna do. We're gonna eat it? doesn't want to eat one, well, we're still not going to give two. But if you wait until she gets back, she'll give you two. She still won't give you two because you ate it. So and I didn't eat a single bite. So go show her, okay?
There you go. Okay, so I have this marshmallow, and you can eat it now, or if you wait a little bit, I'll bring back two for you, okay? How you doing, Sam? Good. Okay, well, I'm gonna go and I haven't found a marshmallow yet, so I'm gonna look for some more, but you stay here, and if you haven't eaten that one, I'll bring you back another one, okay? I'll be right back.
Waiting. Oh, well, you're eating, not waiting for her to give back. We still ate some of it, so still not gonna give it to her. Stay in your chair. There.
Oh, what happened?
She ate her.
Oh, okay. Oh, Hunter, you win! You get two! Good job! You can eat it. You can eat them now.
So that is the marshmallow test. It is a very fun and very cute study. And this is something that you can do with your own children at home by any means. It doesn't have to be a marshmallow. It could be any sort of candy. Just promise them a little bit more later and see what happens. So there are some things that can affect self-control. One of them is uncertainty. So children will not wait as long if they're not confident that they'll receive a later reward. And this was really shown in a study done at the University of Rochester in the United States. So children met an experimenter who said, let's do an art project together, and then handed these children some really broken old crayons. And then they told the child, hang on, just wait a little bit and I'm going to come back and I'm going to get some new art supplies that are way better than these ones. So the children would wait a little bit. The experimenter would come back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I don't actually have the new art supplies, so sorry. And then the experimenter would say to the child, let's play a sticker game. And they would give the child a one single kind of boring sticker. And they said, you know what, hang on. If you wait a little bit, I'm going to come back with more stickers that are way better than this one. And so then the child waits, the experimenter comes back and says, oh gosh, sorry, I made a mistake again. I don't actually have the stickers for you. So now the child has had two experiences with this experimenter where this experimenter has been unreliable. They have not seemed to come back with a later reward. And so then the experimenter gives the child the marshmallow test. And what do you all think happened? Children waited on average, these were 3 to 5 year olds, they waited on average 3 minutes before eating the marshmallow. And remember, 4 year olds are able to wait up to 15 minutes for our next marshmallow. So it seems like this unreliable experimenter was playing a role. There was another group of children who went through the same process, only this time the experimenter did come back. Did come back with the art supplies and did come back with the stickers. And these children waited an average of 12 minutes long. So that's 4 times as long as those in the unreliable condition. Now, this idea of uncertainty equaling less self-control does not only mean that this works for an uncertain experimenter. This could be extrapolated into the environment as well. We have been calling these times uncertain times for quite some time now. And if you think about what that could mean for a child and their self-control, well, this just means that they're uncertain of things that are to come. So if you're seeing your young child exert less self-control, being a little bit more impulsive, then this may be due to the situation that we are in right now. They simply aren't confident in what's happening next, and that is why they are acting more for the now and not so much for the future. Another thing that seems to help self-control or affect self-control is the ability to implement strategies. So children who engage in waiting strategies will wait longer. And we saw a number of strategies being used in that video. One was this young boy playing with his hands to distract himself. We saw another boy licking the marshmallow, not technically eating it, just licking it. We saw over here this older brother who was kind of using his sister's not passing of the marshmallow test as a way to motivate himself to pass the marshmallow test. And then you had this little boy here at the bottom who I would argue was the youngest participant in the video. And he was an absolute rock star at the marshmallow test. He used a number of strategies to help himself wait. He sniffed it, he pretended to sleep, he poked and prodded the marshmallow a little bit. And even though he was young in age, these strategies really helped him wait. So now I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of self-control and self-control in childhood. So there has been some evidence in the science that having a good self-control in childhood would really predict some healthy adult outcomes. And this is one study I want to talk about that was pretty influential. So this was a longitudinal study, which means that they followed the same group of participants over a number of years. How many years, you ask? Well, they followed 1,037 children from their birth to age 32. So this was a 32-year-long study. Really, really amazing. And what's more amazing is that they had a 96% retention rate, which means that by the age of 32, there were still 996 participants in the study, which is absolutely amazing. You just really don't see stuff like that often. So it's great to see when participants really stick it out with us. So what they did is when the participants were age 3, age 5, age 7, age 9, and age 11, they took self-control measures. Now, these self-control measures were not behavioral measures like I've been talking about so far. These were report measures. So what they did was they asked the participants' parents, their teachers, the researchers observed them themselves, and the children themselves. So they asked all these people, how is this participant on self-control based on a number of factors? And then when the participants were 32, they asked them about their lives, particularly what their finances look like. And so I have a graph here. I apologize. I know it's kind of a lot to look at and a little bit blurry. I did pull it directly from the paper, but I will orient you to it. So if you could all just focus on the bottom x-axis here, you can see these are these childhood self-control scores. So over on the left side are the low scoring children. The low scoring children, I apologize, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water. So on the right here are the low scoring children in childhood. And then as we move to the right, we see the highest scoring children for self-control in childhood. Now on the y-axis here are the adult wealth outcomes. So these are these outcome measures that they measured pertaining to them now at 32 years old, what their finances look like. And all these measures were converted into z-scores. Z-scores are essentially a way to convert all these different measures into one standardized score so that they could all be put on the same graph. So if you have a positive z-score or a higher z-score, that would mean that you are scoring above average on that measure. And if you have a lower z-score, you are scoring below average on that measure. So 0 here represents the average. So what we're seeing, so here we have the purple line and this dark green line. Now, both of these represent financial problems and financial struggles. The purple line here is informant rated. So this was someone else rating the participants' financial struggles. And the green line over here is the self-rated financial struggles by the participant themselves. So this is really something you don't want to score high on because you don't really want to be high on financial struggles. Over here, we see a light blue line, and that represents income. So of course, you would like this to be higher than lower. Over here, this red line is financial planfulness. So this is essentially, how are you saving the money that you have, or how are you using the money that you have? Are you being smart with it? So things like saving for retirement would be in this measure. And then finally, we have this dark blue line here, and that represents socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status is essentially your family's wealth in comparison to the rest of the population. So it's what we mean when we say things like low class, middle class, and upper class. So again, this is something that you would rather score higher on. So what we're seeing here is that participants who had low self-control scores in childhood had high levels or high scores of financial struggles, higher than average, and lower than average income, financial planfulness, and socioeconomic status. And as we move up in the self-control measures, we see that swap happening, where now the highest scoring participants who had high scores of self-control in childhood had low financial struggles and high socioeconomic status, income, and financial planfulness. Now, these results are really, really kind of eye-opening. They really tell us that, wow, self-control in childhood must really mean something. But what I don't want you to take away from these results is if your child doesn't pass the marshmallow test, that they're going to be financially destitute at the age of 32, because that is not at all the case. This is something we say all the time in social sciences: correlation does not equal causation. What we are looking here is a ton of correlation. So these seem to have a relationship with each other, but we are not saying that childhood self-control actually causes these outcomes. It just seems to relate in some way. Also, after 32 years of life, there's a really good chance that some other factors are at play here to get these outcomes. And that's what we would call confounding variables. Another thing I want to say is that self-control is not stable throughout life. A child with low self-control can learn and change as they grow up. You can definitely learn self-control in your adolescence or in your adulthood. It is a dynamic quality. So it's not something that's set in stone at the age of 11. But here are some tips and tricks nonetheless to improve self-control in the children in your own lives. So one, I say implement a routine, eliminate uncertainty, and increase the predictability in your child's schedule. This will help them be more patient because they'll know what's coming next and they'll be able to anticipate the events that come next and be sure that they're going to come next. This also really helps with episodic future thinking, EFT, which, as we have seen, has improved self-control and decision-making as well. Another piece of advice I have is to create some weighting strategies with your child, and this could be a fun activity that you do together. So here I have some examples. I have create a weighting mantra, something that your child or you can repeat over and over again as you wait. I have here, keep on keeping on. I think you all could do a little bit better than that. This is, the best I could come up with, but, get creative. So then we have visual reminders. Now, visual reminders are a great way to keep your child waiting. You could put a sticker or a bracelet on your child and call it the waiting sticker or the waiting bracelet. And that way your child will have a visual cue to keep looking at to ground them in their waiting, remind them why they're waiting and what they're waiting for. Finally, distraction. If you all can figure out a way to distract your children on the fly, I'm sure some parents already have, quite frankly, and that is a great way to get the time pass by. Finally, my last tip is to teach by demonstration. Children, particularly young children, model their behaviors after their parents. So show them that you can wait too, and show them that you have your own waiting strategies that perhaps you could teach your child when appropriate. The final type of future thing I'm going to talk about is saving. Now, I want to make a quick note about self-control and saving. It really seems like self-control and saving go hand in hand. Why wouldn't a child who's better at resisting immediate rewards be better at saving their money and resisting spending it? But surprisingly, so far, we haven't seen a correlation between these two measures in children. So that's to say that children who perform on the Marshmallow Test don't necessarily perform well on our saving paradigms, and we're really not sure why. But I will say this, saving in children is still widely unstudied. So it's possible that we just haven't come up with the right paradigms that really tap at the same processes that self-control use, because it just seems so correct in theory to see that self-control and saving go hand in hand together. So it's possible that as more literature and as more data emerges, that a correlation will appear in the next few years. But we did come up with a paradigm in our lab to measure shaving in young children. And I believe my supervisor was probably the first to do this. So what you're all looking at right now are marble runs. What are marble runs? Well, they're runs for your marbles, of course. So you put your marble in at the top here and it would just kind of go squiggly down. It'd be really fun to watch. And then it would land in that box over there. Now you can see between the two marble runs which marble run children would prefer. Of course, they're going to prefer this bigger, more extravagant marble run to put their marbles down. So this is how the saving paradigm worked. We gave children 3 marbles and we told them that they were going to go into room 1, the red room, first for 3 minutes. Then they were going to go into the blue room for 3 minutes. Now, children had already seen what was in the red room and what was in the blue room, and they had played with both marble runs before, so they were very familiar with what was in each room. And what we were curious about is how many of those 3 marbles are children going to save from the red room to put in the blue room? Because once they landed in that little box over there, they weren't going to get the marbles back. And what we saw again with 4-year-olds is the first time they did this, they did not really save at all. 4-year-olds were either saving none or just 1 marble to bring into that next room. But children did this again. So after they did that, they visited the 2 rooms, the experimenter gave them 3 more marbles and they repeated the process. And on the second trial, the 4-year-olds did save more marbles. This time they were saving 1 to 2 marbles. So it seems like children are learning from their past disappointments and making sure that they don't experience that boredom in that big marble room again. So some things that seem to affect saving, and I put seem to here because the literature is still very young, so I want to be cautious with the conclusions that I draw. But one of those things is learning from past disappointment, and we see that with that improvement on the second trial. Another thing, again, is prompting. So we ran a follow-up of the same paradigm, but now some children received an extra instruction. When they went into the first room, they were told, you can use all your marbles here, or you can save some of them to bring into the next room. And simply being told that they could save improved children's performance on this paradigm. So my tips and tricks for improving savings, I don't have much because the literature is still young, but I will say this again, reminders are helping your child. So let them know that saving is an option. We do know that children are impulsive. They're very go, go, go and do, do, do. So withholding and saving is not usually the first thing that they'll think about. Because I didn't give you that many tips and tricks for savings, I will give you all another one. So what else can you do to help your child's future thinking overall? You can simply talk to them about the future. Now, there is a lot of literature to back this up. Your future talk influences your child's future talk. There was one study done that recorded families during their meal times, and they noticed that families who had more conversations about future events, their children, who in this case were 4-year-olds, had more future talk language in their day-to-day vocabulary. So things like saying tomorrow or later or next time, they were saying more of these when they had more conversations about the future. And of course, if they talk more about the future, chances are they're thinking more about the future. But interestingly enough, this future talk paradigm at mealtime and recording conversations, that's really the only instance of naturalistic observation of future thinking that we see in children's own homes. The rest of the research is in a lab until now. So I'll be doing another study over the summer that I'm recruiting for, where I'll be putting parents in the driver's seat. Now they will be looking and tracking their child's behaviors, so future thinking behaviors in their own homes, and reporting what they see. Because right now we really just don't know what future thinking behaviors look like when we're not creating a paradigm to induce them. So we're looking for 4 to 8-year-olds, and if you are interested in participating in this and getting more involved with the research, please email ccll@uottawa.ca. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the summer of 2021, then I encourage you to look up the results and see what we have found. Okay, so I know I kind of shoved my studies down your throat, and I'm sorry, but I'm also not sorry because I hope that I at least got you interested from this presentation in participating in studies with your child, because that would be awesome. We need you. Research is an absolute numbers game. So the more participants we get, the more representative our findings are. We get a more accurate average when we have a sample of 250 children compared to a sample of only 50 children. Also, developmental research, so research with children, is probably one of the hardest fields to recruit for. And that's for 2 reasons, really. One is that parents seem to get really turned off by the terms researching your child. And I can't say I blame them. It's kind of a cold way to say it, and it sounds even invasive, right? But hopefully you've learned from this presentation that simply what we do is we just play games and we're just curious about what children will do and what they're thinking. The other reason why it's difficult for us to have and keep participants is because our participant pool really has a lifespan of about 3 to maybe 5 years before they can't be our participants anymore. And that's simply because children get older. So if we have a 3-year-old, 5 years later, they're going to be an 8-year-old, and they're going to just be on the end of the cusp of children that we can study for this. So we need to constantly be replenishing our participant pool so that we can keep having children and keep doing research. Now, if you're not thinking about participating in studies after this talk, now that is okay too, but let me please address some common concerns that I hear from parents all the time as my last ditch effort to try and change your mind. So one, we are not evaluating your children. These paradigms are not tests. Our studies are really just meant to be fun for the children and the parents. We never take an individual child's performance into account because honestly, if your child eats the marshmallow, that doesn't mean that they don't have any self-control. It might just mean that they don't want the second marshmallow or they just feel like it. You know, it's totally fine. It doesn't really have to represent self-control. That's why we work off of averages. That's why we use big data, because we know that children are creatures that are going to do whatever they want at the end of the day, not necessarily what we want them to do. Secondly, your child's information stays confidential. And this is the #1 priority for all ethical researchers. So researchers in our lab especially, we go through such a vigorous process to make sure that your child stays safe and your information stays safe as well. And I say ethical researchers here because I'm kind of taking a jab at big companies like Google and Facebook who sell our information to advertisers. We do not do that. um, Thirdly, researchers are well educated in their topic, but usually we're not clinicians. So we are not going to diagnose your child or give any sort of medical advice like that. Granted, you are at a mental health conference right now, and you are going to listen to a lot of speakers who are trained clinically. But usually the researcher that is actually working with your child on a paradigm is likely not qualified to give any sort of advice like that. But we do have resources, and if you are interested or concerned about your child's development, mental health, etc., we do have the resources and can point you in the right direction. Finally, I'd like to make one quick note about diversity in research. Now, diversity in all forms, race, education, socioeconomic status, is absolutely crucial to producing relevant results. Right now, the majority of the children that we have in our studies, and in most, if not all Western studies, are Caucasian, upper class, university educated families. Now, this is such a small portion of an otherwise large and diverse country. So it would be great if we could instead get accurate representation of our population in our studies so that our results are relevant to families like mine and families like yours, and our results don't come with a bias. And this is really important because research has far-reaching implications. Research underlies the education system, how your child is being educated, what they learn, the products and toys that are advertised to you and your child. All this stuff in your day-to-day life is grounded in research. So it is very important that research is unbiased and relevant to as many children as possible. So if there are minorities in the audience of any sort, I highly, highly encourage you to participate in research, even if that is adult research, because your representation is absolutely necessary for the process. So this concludes my presentation. I am so honored to have had the opportunity to speak directly with families. I want to thank the moderators and the coordinators of this conference for allowing me to speak directly to the people that my research is for. And so it all is for you, and it all begins with you as well. We wouldn't know any of the things that we know now if it weren't for the families that dedicated their time to us and the pursuit of knowledge. So thank you so much.